Hey Adventure, so I'm going to go over my review and thoughts on Rings of Power Season 2 Episode 3. If you watched my last video, you'll remember that I said that I enjoyed, for the most part, I enjoyed Episode 2 and that I was looking forward actually to watching Episode 3. So that's kind of where I went into this episode with, and let's go through this. Right at the beginning, the orcs are talking about how the horse, is it the horse? Yeah, it's the horse that escapes and runs into some trees, and they say something about it's a black forest, nothing escapes from there, nothing comes out of there alive, or something like that. But it's just a very random black forest that wasn't ever there before, it was never mentioned before, it makes no sense why that would suddenly be a thing. Yeah, especially since we have no idea how long it's been since last season and this season. It seems like it's only been a handful of days, maybe weeks, but we really don't know. So Black Forest seems weird. It also roped they'd thrown a lasso around the horse's neck, and the next time you see it, it never shook the lasso off. The last thing you saw was the horse running away with the orc dragging behind it with the lasso and the collar still around the horse's neck, and then the next time you see the horse, it doesn't have the collar anymore. So just, yeah, again, where did that go? Then we also see the horse just decide to wander into a creepy cave that undoubtedly would have told the horse completely that no, it's not to go in there. There's no horse, I don't feel like, would have ever gone in there of its own accord. And maybe I don't know horses that well, which is true. I'm not the most well versed in horses, but that seemed kind of false because animals don't usually do that sort of thing. However, the fact that Isildur finds out about the spiders and fights some of the spiders a little bit, I don't mind. I think that was supposed to be Shelob that he ends up fighting, and I don't love that, especially since he stabs it in the face and there's no damage to Shelob's face as you go forward into the future. But if it's just a random spider, that's fine. If it's supposed to be Shelob, I don't love it. However, the idea that Isildur does know about spiders and faced them at one point in time, well, first off, it doesn't. The distances of things don't make any sense, because they go to Pelargir later in the episode and it doesn't take them very long. It takes them like a day to walk there, less than a day. And so there's that as well. Isildur finding out that there's spiders in Mordor at this point, I don't hate, because at some point Cirith Ungol does have to be named, and that name comes from the word Ungoliant, which has to do with darkness and shadow, and Cirith Ungol is like the basically the path of Ungoliant essentially is how it translates darkness, the path of darkness type thing. Corny generic dialogue between Elendil and Eärien, which is frustrating, especially since Eärien isn't even supposed to exist for Elendil, and I've talked about this before, but yeah, just some corny generic fantasy dialogue that wasn't that great. I still don't care for Miriel, but Pharazôn actor, once again, is absolutely one of the best actors, or his portrayal of the character is one of the best performances in the show. And I can see how he could become our Pharazôn the Golden. Even with them twisting the story in the way that they have, I can see how he could become that character from the books that he's supposed to be, and we'll talk more about that later. Then we see Eärien sitting with Pharazôn and Belzegar and what's his name? Kemen. Table, like eating or something like that, and talking. And it just seems strange that Eärien would be in that company. I know that her and Kemen started a little bit of a friendship last season, but it wasn't nearly enough to warrant her being with Pharazôn and with these other important people. Yeah, that seemed a little bit strange. Valandil absolutely roasting Kemen though, and Pharazôn being okay with it. That's an interesting scene, and I didn't mind it. I like Valandil's character better this season because his focus is no longer on basically on being in Isildur's shadow anymore. It's on how it's basically he lost his two best friends. He lost Ontamo and Isildur, and he thinks they're both dead. And yeah, it's understandable that his character would be a little bit different, a little bit more somber, a little bit more serious in this season, and I'm okay with it. But then Aerion takes so long to tell what it is that she's found. It's literally only done so that Muriel will have time to find the empty pedestal, and it's a very poorly used writing device and storytelling device, because we don't need her to drag it out. I found something bad. I found something. I don't remember what all she said, but she said like 5 different things, and she took super long space in between them, and it did not help anything. It did not tell the story well at all. Damrod looks fantastic. The hill troll, which I suspected he would. I actually liked the design that they had for the ice troll in season 1. Yeah, it looked a little CGI, but the actual design, the character design, looked good, and Damrod again here looks fantastic. I'm excited to see a little bit more about Damrod. I know the marketing material has made him out to be a little bit bigger made him out to be an actual character in the show, and so I'm excited to see if that stays the case and what he ends up doing. So then we go back to the dwarves, and Durin being completely critical and distrusting of Anatar. For one, the performance there, for the actor, I can't remember his name, Owen something or other, but the performance is really, really strong. His performance in this episode was really strong throughout the entirety of the episode. I made note of it several. His performance was strong, but also just his distrust for Anatar, or Anatar. What is it? Anatar, I think is how they say it in the show. And that distrust is so interesting to me, and the performance, and it makes sense for the character, and it makes sense when you see the relationship that Durin and Elrond have had in the past, and seeing how already as a dwarf and because of Elrond and everything, he's mistrusting of elves, but then Elrond is kind of the only elf that he does trust, and then you bring in this Anatar, and he's clearly lying to them, and Durin can see it, or at least maybe he can't see the lies, but he can see that there's something off about it all, and that's really good. So yeah, credit where credit's due. The acting for Durin is really top notch this season, or this episode especially. And then I just made this comment because I've thought about it so many times, but why do the dwarves never change their clothes? Like, I get it in Lord of the Rings when they're traveling light, and when Gimli really only has one set of clothes, they don't really have a pack where they can change their clothes often. But this is, even last season when Durin and Disa were prince and princess, they only wore one set of clothes the entire time. And that's, like, I get it from a costuming perspective that they need to clearly be the same character, and I get it from the costuming perspective that it's cheaper to only have one costume, but they're royals. They should have more than one costume, more than one pair of clothes, more than one set of clothes, and the fact that they've never changed clothes throughout the entirety of these 2 seasons just doesn't work, doesn't make any sense at all. Especially when Durin goes down and is laboring in the mines. You'd think that he would have some different clothes on, that he would put on some different clothes that aren't so royal, that I don't know, that's a little thing that really doesn't matter, but it does. It matters for immersiveness, it matters for reality. And the fact that he never changes his clothes, none of the dwarfs ever change their clothes. Very, very few of the characters have changed their clothes. That's an issue for me. I don't think Celebrimbor would just casually pat Amaya on the shoulder like he did with Anatar. I kind of, in some ways, I like how the actor is playing Celebrimbor, where he's very much this like mad scientist almost type character, and in some ways I really like that, and in some ways I feel that's the easy answer to how that character should be played. It's not maybe it's not wrong, but it's the easy answer. It's not the interesting answer. And sometimes I find the character interesting, and I think maybe in future episodes, based on what I've seen in the trailers, I think that maybe this could be taken in an interesting direction. But I feel like he should be more than just the half crazed creator. Yeah, that's interesting, but I also don't feel like Celebrimbor would just go pat Sauron on the shoulder, or Anatar on the shoulder. But then Sauron is absolutely manipulating Celebrimbor in everything that he does, and that's right. That's what he should be. He's a deceiver. He's a manipulator. This is exactly the character of Sauron, and I don't mind that. I like the performance that Vickers is giving for Sauron, and yeah, it's good. Then we get to Arondir and the Southlanders storyline. This is not a well-told storyline this season. Arondir, the actor Ismael Cruz Cordova, isn't doing a horrible job. He did a decent job last season, and his performance this season was fairly good as well. And of course, he's very much the cool elf character. That's his archetype. That's his role in the show. And so that's cool to see, even though it's just flash. There's no substance. But I wrote, why isn't Arondir collecting his arrows? He just shot a whole bunch of arrows, and he pulls one out and walks away. And you can see in his quiver that he's got 3 arrows, and then he pulls the one out, and it's so that he has 4 arrows left. Why didn't he go collect all the rest of his arrows like any sane archer would do? I don't know. I know why. Because they didn't want the story to have to deal with that, because that's too realistic. And then I also wrote, why is he being such a jerk? And that is answered later in the episode, but it doesn't. He's still a Rondir. He's still an elf. I don't feel like that's how he should have been acting. So then we get to Bronwyn. I said I'm okay that they killed off Bronwyn, but why? Makes no sense from last season. It seems like it's just because the actress didn't return. And I feel like that's truly the case. I feel like the actress just didn't come back, and so they're like, all right, well, what do we do with her character now? Because we don't want to recast her, and even though they recast Adar, but they didn't want to recast Bronwyn apparently, and that's fine. Don't want to, that's fine. But then they killed her off, and so they're like, okay, we're not going to recast her, so we're going to kill her off. How can we do that? And they come up with the excuse that orc arrows are basically poisoned, and humans can't fight off that poison very well. And that's fine. That's a lore explanation, sure, but it's not consistent with last season, and I've talked about it before, how I don't mind a soft reboot of some sort, but at the same time, they're remaining as faithful to last season as they can in most areas, and in some areas they're not. And this is one of the areas that they should have stayed more faithful to last season. In some of the other areas, they should have strayed a little bit. And so that doesn't really make sense. And then also from a storytelling perspective, they shouldn't have told us who was dead. They shouldn't have done the flashback to the scene of Bronwyn smiling. They should have just let Theo walk by and stick the torch in the pyre, and then let us infer from that it's Bronwyn. And then later on in the episode, as they're talking about it, as they're bringing it up, there's another conversation later on between Arondir and Theo where they're talking about this, and that's a much better way to have told us who it was, rather than showing us a flashback of this character to say, oh yes, this is who it is, in case you've forgotten. Yeah, everybody's probably forgotten, but still, they should have done it differently. They should have, from a storytelling perspective, they didn't need to do that flashback. Last season, when I was seeing this, when I was watching this and I was seeing the stuff with Bronwyn and Arondir, I was thinking that it was that the way they were going with this, because of what rights they had, was that they were going to make Bronwyn and Arondir have a relationship and have a kid, and that kid would then have the elven blood that then goes down through the years to the Prince of Dol Amroth, which is specifically talked about, and how Legolas comes up to him and in I believe it's Return of the King, and talks about how he can still see the elven blood in his veins and in who he is, even though it's long diluted, long ago that there was an elf in his bloodline. And so that's kind of where I was expecting this storyline to go. Obviously, it can't go that way now because they just killed Bronwyn. I'm okay with that because Tolkien does have some answers, some ideas of where this this character goes, or how that bloodline gets down there. He didn't give any firm, solid answers saying this is the way, but I don't mind for a show that's so disrespectful to the lore in so many ways, and so it strays so far from the lore. That's something that I could have seen them doing and said, okay, they don't have the rights to this thing, so they're making up their own reason for something, and okay, that's fine. I wouldn't have loved it, but anyways, it's not important because it obviously can't come to pass now. And then I did write that I like the look of Pelargir. I feel like it looks like an old settlement, an old Numenorian settlement that people aren't really there anymore. Numenor isn't there anymore, and there's some good stuff that goes in it. The conversation between Theo and Isildur, that's an interesting conversation. Like, for the first time ever, I'm actually interested in the character of Theo a little bit. The fact that he just lost his mom, and the fact that he's communicating with Isildur and rejecting even more Arondir. There's some interesting storytelling going on there for a episode of a fantasy television. Disa is a lot less frustrating this season, which is good. Durin's performance is great. His apology to Durin Durin the Fourth's performance is great. His apology to Durin the Third is painful because I know exactly how it feels to say something like that. It's a good conversation, and then so the apology is very realistic. You can see the stubbornness, the pain, the pride in Durin the Fourth as he's trying to give this apology, while at the same time knowing that he's not wrong in every way, but that he still needs to apologize, and he is wrong in some areas, and just the conflict within him and the desire not to, but then also how difficult it truly is to give that sort of apology. The nuance in the performance there, I thought, was really well done. We also then have a little bit of a conversation that's a tie back to last season, which is good, about how basically the doom of the elves, and how if they give them mithril and remove this potential of the elves dying and fading, that something worse may come of it, and that Durin feels like that something worse may actually be coming, that this may be that something worse. And that's a good conversation as well. It's unfortunate that everything has to do with the mithril being a magical rock that can turn away corruption, turn away evil, and can save the lives of the elves. That whole storyline, the mithril storyline, is still a mess. They need to just completely get rid of that and stop doing anything with that, because it's just not good. Arondir uses the word slaked, S-L-A-K-E-D, and I didn't know this word, but it has to do with like a quenching of your thirst. And well done, good job, writers, for finding a word that I'm not saying that I know every word in the dictionary, or that I have a extremely expansive knowledge of vocabulary, but I have a larger than most people, I feel like, most of our modern day audience anyways, and so good on the writers for finding a word that fits the situation, fits the scene, and that is significantly less commonly used. So good on them. And then also Isildur just happens to be healed now. He got stabbed in the thigh by a knife earlier in the episode, but now he's just completely healed and no more limping, all because he got sewed up, apparently. I don't know. I don't get that. It's bad writing is what it is. Estrid, I don't care for the character. They're trying to do something with this character, and I don't care for it. I don't know. Maybe I need to see more of the character, but it feels so stereotypical with this character. Just introducing a potential love interest, and her clearly being evil, clearly having secrets that she's hiding from Isildur and stuff like that, and I don't care for it. Also, I noticed that she breaks her accent a couple of times as she's speaking, and usually it's mostly unnoticeable, except that it's just like one word that's said slightly differently than how that accent should say that word, and I don't know how I can catch this. Quite honestly, I don't, because I have a ear for accents, and I can pick them up usually fairly quickly if I'm listening to them consistently, but I don't usually hear the mistakes in them like that. And so it was interesting that I was catching those, because they were very subtle. They were very subtle breaks. Continuing on, it's not quite how Pharazôn took power. He did it by marrying Queen Muriel, forcing Muriel to marry him, and then over time slowly taking control away from her. Lore-wise, it's not accurate to the lore. This way of him becoming king and taking over is not accurate to the lore, but from the perspective of this show, it kind of fits the story that's being told and the way that they're telling the story. So lore-wise or consistency-wise with the rest of the show, I can't get mad at it. Lore-wise, of course, I'm not too happy with it. I don't feel like Sauron needs to be directly touching the ore. So what happens is Celebrimbor takes the mithril from King Durin and gives it to Sauron, and Sauron takes it and holds it, and then drops it into the rest of the melted ore, and that's what it's done. What it's doing is it's intentionally showing how Sauron has a direct influence on the creation of the rings and how he can exert his influence and his will over these rings because he had a direct hand in creating them. I don't feel like this is necessary. I feel like he could have just been participating in the creation of the rings and it wouldn't have needed to actually touch the materials, physically touch the materials. But it is done as a way to, it's used as a means of showing his influence, and as such it's not horrible because it allows the performer to perform, and it allows the idea to get across that he's directly influencing these rings. So I don't hate that. It's not the worst decision that's been made in this show. Okay, now I want to talk about this last thing before I do my rating, and that's how the orcs want a home. This is a storyline from last season, and I've seen like headlines and titles and stuff about how this is how they're trying to make us sympathize with the orcs, and how they're trying to make the orcs good guys and not evil and stuff like that. And that's not entirely true. This is actually in the lore of Tolkien. Tolkien's orcs, everybody says that they're just like cannon fodder and they don't really play much of a role. But if you pay attention to what the orcs actually say, you'll notice some little things like this, how the orcs, they don't love serving Sauron. They don't love working for him and being slaves and warriors and dying all the time. Yeah, that's their culture to some degree, but they don't love that. And so what they want to do is they want to get away from that, and they want to have a home. And when you start actually reading into what the dialogue that the orcs have in the books, in the Lord of the Rings books, you will see that this is a actual theme. This is an actual idea in Tolkien's works. And so for the people who are talking about how this is not, how that's like just they're trying to make us sympathize with the orcs and this, that, and the other, no, yeah, they are to some degree, but at the same time it is part of Tolkien's world, and so I'm not offended by that in any way, shape, or form, because it is actually part of the lore that exists. And so yeah, maybe not exactly how they're showing it, but I don't have any problem with the orcs clearly wanting a home, clearly wanting to be under the control of a warlord, and wanting to just be able to do what they want to do. That's part of the lore. And so yeah, that's enough of that conversation. I just wanted to bring it up as an episode of a fantasy TV series. This one I felt was worse than last episode for sure. I put it at like a 6.5 or a 7. I think a 6.5 is closer. Somewhere between a 6 and a 7. I think a 6.5 is probably the closest for an episode of a fantasy TV series. As Lord of the Rings, as something related to Lord of the Rings and following lore and stuff, it's about a 5 of 10. It's right in the middle, where there's some things that are fairly lore accurate, there's some things that are not accurate at all, and it's just kind of walking the line between egregious and okay. It's just there. It's just existing, and that's not a great place for it to be, quite honestly, but it's also not the worst place for it to be. There's been other episodes that are far worse, and so it's still an improvement. It's episode 2 so far has been the best. Episode 3 of the 3 episodes that we've gotten so far, episode 2 is the best, then episode 3, and then episode 1 is the worst so far. So yeah, that's my thoughts and review of season 2, episode 3 of The Rings of Power. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We will be back on Thursday with our normal video, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.